some reason, I'm looking through the San Jose Mercury in the just random stuff section for sale. And I see world's first video game computer space. No price, just call. I'm like, wow, I'm pretty interested in this. So I called the guy. I said, so you got a computer space? Yeah. He goes, yeah. First game ever. Okay, great. What color is it? And he goes, well, what color do you want? I'm like, wow, this is getting very interesting, because who has a whole bunch of computer spaces and who would know that they came in all these different colors? He goes, I got a yellow, a solid blue, metal flake blue, and metal flake red. And he goes, a whole bunch of other games too. Okay, great. Want to come up and see them. These were in a Quonset hut on a sunflower seed farm off of Highway 80 in Dixon, California, halfway between, the Bay Area and Sacramento. And these things hadn't been moved in, probably since 1975. And so I got in touch with Nolan and showed him the pictures and scratched his head, and then like a light bulb went off in his head. He goes, these were Ted Dabney's. These were Ted Dabney's units. This was his route. When he left, he took a route that we had, and he goes, this yellow one's the first one. He goes, I know it. That yellow one is the very first one. I kept the first one, which is a beautiful yellow computer space, and I kept Pong number 46. And we got the rest of them running and working as good as we could. We got it all for $5,000. I don't regret the purchase one bit. Not for a minute.
Well, I'd say 30 years to pretty much the present. The arcades have been relegated to the back rooms and the side streets, and generally been an unsavory type of place. What we want to do is bring the amusement game to age. If we can give it a new zip and a pizzazz, it's going to be financially successful, as well as, I think, a very serious part in the leisure time activity of the American people.
The marriage of traditional pinball machines and computer technology has resulted in the birth of a new breed of amusement games. And Nolan Bushnell is the man handing out the cigars. Bushnell has developed two such games, Computer Space and Pong, and believes that they and others like them will move the pinball industry out of America's bus stations and bowling alleys and into the space age. In 1971, Bushnell invented Computer Space, but sold production rights to Nutting Associates of Mountain View, California, for royalties based on the number of games sold. It proved a good deal for both parties. Sales already exceed 1,500 machines. Computer Space, like Pong, sells for around $1,000 and is played on the screen of a standard television set, which has been programmed to display the desired game. In Computer Space, the player controls a rocket ship, which is trying to shoot down enemy flying saucers while avoiding their missiles. If the player scores more hits than the enemy saucers, he gets one free play. By the time Bushnell invented Pong in 1972, he was able to form his own company, Syzygy Corporation in Santa Clara, California, to produce the game. He has already sold over 1,000 machines and expects to sell 10,000 in the United States by the end of the year. Pong, as the name might indicate, is a game of video ping pong. The two players turn dials which control their electronic paddles and volley with an equally electronic ball. The first player to score 15 points wins. While Bushnell did design and program both his games, The technology he uses dates back to the late 1950s. Thanks to research by the Defense Department in the wake of Sputnik, Bushnell is now able to act out his dream of a nation inhabited by thousands of Pong and computer space games.
The government spends millions of dollars on this technology, and as a result, now it's cheap enough that we can put it into a game and sell it for 25 cents for a few minutes and make $1 out of it. It's something that the research and development really was done many years ago, and now it's cheap enough that with PC boards and integrated circuits, we can use that technology to our advantage.
The basic electronic unit of Bushnell's games is the integrated circuit. Each of these small chips is capable of storing large amounts of information. The program for a game is determined by specific combinations of these units to form a PC, or printed circuit board. The printed circuit board then tells the TV screen what to do. A single printed circuit board is all that is required to operate Pong, whereas 15 years ago it would have taken enough tubes and wiring to fill an average house. Bushnell first saw the commercial potential of video games in a game called Space War, which has been played at computer centers around the country for several years.
We used to play Space War a lot at the AI project at Stanford, which is a big computer complex. And one day it just hit, this is a lot of fun. You ought to be able to package it and sell it for a price. And, one thing leads to another, and pretty soon, from doodling on a scratch pad, you're actually working out some basic block diagrams, and from there you think, boy, it's going to work.
You know what the Atari motto is? Innovative leisure, right? Well, it didn't say innovative arcade games. It didn't say innovative video games. It said innovative leisure. It was broad from day one. I mean, Nolan always had a consumer game in his mind because that's what he hired me to do. And I wound up doing the wrong thing and making a hit coin-op game, right? When I was at Ampex, I learned how to make sync generators, synchronizing, the basic fundamental circuit necessary to get a TV signal, because we had to generate an analog signal. So you do that, and you get the ball at one speed, and you put paddles up, and it's a very, very boring game. And so I added the speed up, and I added the angles off of that, just, you know, to make it playable, interesting. And so it started getting a little interesting. That's cute. And no one said, well, it's got to have score. We had a pretty good game, and hey, great. So what are you going to do for sound? I go, sound? I'm already over budget. What am I going to do? Nolan said, well, I want the sound of a roar of a crowd of thousands applauding your win. And Ted said, I want boos and hisses. And I'm thinking, how do I do that? Listen, I got video. I got the goddamn game up. Now you wanted me to do this. I'll be right back. So I pissed around for a day and poked around sounds that already existed in the vertical sync generator and gated them out with the 555 timer. I love it. Years later, the sound is so well thought out, so appropriate. It was like, are you kidding me? It was just, you know, just thrown together in spite of what the boss said. And so that was how Pong came to be.
So everybody's heard the Pong story. Probably everybody's heard the Pong story, but I've heard it many times, and from Al Alcorn himself, who designed Pong. So
the story I've heard is that they installed one of the first Pong machines in a tavern and let people play it as a test.
Put it out into an arcade and see if it makes money. I mean, that's the market research.
My understanding was Ted built a cabinet, a tabletop, simple cabinet over the weekend. And a coin mech bolted to the side of the cabinet, tabletop type of big thing was sit on a barrel.
Placing a interactive video machine somewhere and having people play it was still a relatively new concept. Nobody knew if it was going to go.
Oh, what is the name of the bar in Palo Alto?
San Jose?
No, it was Andy Caps.
It was Santa Clara?
Sunnyvale.
So we'll put it in Andy Caps. You know, it's a coin-op game, be it fragile and humble. And so we did.
Well, my memory is that he gets a phone call, the game's busted, which of course is the usual thing you get on a support line. It doesn't work. What is it, and in what way does it not work? Well, it doesn't work.
The bar owner or manager at the time kind of yelled at them and like accused them of their game being shoddy because it had already broken down and it was no longer functioning or working.
And they get a call, you know, later on that night and like, hey, this fucking thing broke, you know. Come and pick up this piece of shit game and get it out of here. You know, this fucking thing broke. You know, I'm not gonna waste my time fixing this crap.
But anyway, the machine, we got the word that it stopped working, and I figured it could be anything, and I'd go out there and take a look at it. And so I went to the machine, and the first thing you do is you want to try to play the game, because the machine was on in a tracked mode, so it was working, but you couldn't start a game. So you open up the coin box to basically flip the micro switch to give yourself a free game, because I'm not going to waste a quarter, you know.
And so they went down to see what's wrong with the machine to fix it, and what they found out was that it wasn't broken, it was just that So many people had played it, they'd filled the coin box with quarters and it was jammed and it couldn't take any more.
So many people had played it that it couldn't accept any more money.
The game is broken because it's stuffed so full of quarters.
Completely stuffed with quarters.
And it was a small, I remember it was kind of small, if I remember. It was a small space. It just filled up with the quarters and it wouldn't take it.
When I opened up the coin mech, you know, all these quarters just gushed out. So, whoa, that's impressive.
It's the equivalent of like crashing a server. When you launch a new website and it's so popular. So they crashed the server on Pong.
And one of the other reasons it was also so popular is because you could play it with one hand while you're still holding a pint in your other hand. And that also was one of those things that, you know, eventually many, many years later led to the rise of the fun barcades that we have, you know, and we can enjoy now.
As Al will always say with a little, you know, twinkle in his eye, he goes, "This is a problem I can fix."
Basically, the way it worked was you take the money, the deal you have, and you split the take with the owner of the bar. And so I did that, and I had this sack of quarters, and the next day I come into work and I said, I got the machine fixed, and here's the problem. Goddamn thing's making too much money. And they'll, really?
But it was one of those great moments where something that supposedly was failing was actually such a huge success that no one could recognize. It was truly the ugly duckling version of technology.
Because remember, Nolan thought, he was like, this is just a placeholder until we get to design the really good game, because who's going to play this stupid shit-ass game?
They went on to produce all of these classic, memorable arcade titles for years that allowed the company to survive and be so much more than a one-hit wonder. So that's my understanding of the history of Pong.
It's a great story if it's true.
When a story is good, you know there's some doubt about it. Like, oh, that's too good to be really true. It's probably a boring version of it that's actually true.
You know, it sounds realistic to me. You know, I mean, I've kind of seen that happen in my own. And when you do get a really great game, the coins will just overflow, and you know, it's kind of a cool feeling.
Anyway, that's how that all happened. Yeah. Anyway.
Health, range, laser, speed, rocket, range, health, laser, shot, bounce, speed, range, rocket, speed, speed, shot, speed, range, speed, bounce, range, laser, speed, rocket, shot, range, speed, shot, range, speed, laser, speed, range, shot, range, rocket, health, speed, shot, laser, range, health, range, bounce, shot, shot, bounce, range, laser, rocket, range, shot,
I mean, Atari really, why were they in the pinball business? You know, here they had this tiger by the tail of video games, you know, just this supernova of creativity and possibilities. And, you know, they were nailing it left and right, creating new genres every other week. Why would you mess around with pinball? You could tell our games were just not working, you know, and due to reliability, poor engineering, you know, thermal issues, issues of the games just falling apart, poor hardware design. You know, it just, I could see the writing was on the wall that we were going to go down. I mean, the pinball division was just a massive disaster. I mean, it was, you know, it's kind of the, you know, kind of the hubris of, you know, I guess Silicon Valley, even in that era, you know, was like, oh, these morons in Chicago, they make these crappy old games, you know, like we're going to redesign everything. We're going to put the display down in the bottom. We're going to, put the boards, underneath the play field so all the crap falls in and shorts out the things. And I mean, it was really horrific design, and they caught on fire. The solenoids, they used this thing called rotary solenoids, which burned up, and the screws fell out. And, it was kind of a, just a complete disaster as far as like design and also testing. And so there was a lot of games that caught on fire in the early days. So, but they made a lot of money when they were working. We did. I think the programming was awesome because I did it.
You will hear stories of hot tubs in the lobby and drug use in the office, and I'm here to tell you that none of that happened in my department.
We started smoking pot right in our office. Rob and I were like the premier pot. Sorry, Rob. I and some other person who occasionally shared an office with me for 5 years at Atari, however that frickin' worked, we would just fire up right in the office. It's like, who knows why? It's like, this is like, it's illegal. It's like, it wasn't even a sense of privilege. It was just mindlessness.
I worked in a satellite office. I started in 1977, which was still pretty early. It was only 18 months since the 2600 came out. But there was no hot tub in the lobby of the office that I went to. There was no drug use in Atari, though I don't doubt that it was over where Howard and Todd Fry were working.
Drugs were consumed at Atari by all kinds of people at all levels of management, from the bottom to the top and all over engineering. Not everybody did drugs, but some people did, and some people enjoyed them, and some people abused them, and some people went to the hospital on them. And but by and large, drugs were a relatively nominal factor. Drugs, you know, there was a lot of marijuana, and it would participated a lot in brainstormings. So we had the way of, you know, trying to incorporate drugs into our productivity model.
I went home and I smoked a joint, a little bit of cocaine and a little bit of psilocybin in it. And I was sitting there, it was about half gone when I realized, oh, you could do that. And it's like, I put it out and I went and I wrote a page of notes. And my design for that kernel was exactly what it ended up shipping. It was like, it was a tremendous amount of effort, actually, to get everything organized.
You know, they did have good deliveries of cannabis in the inter-office mail. You know, that was probably the primary use of those yellow manila envelopes. I think it was, you know, Fridays or Monday. I think it was Fridays when you get these really thick envelopes coming through the system. And, you know, and it was weird. It was like there was a guy working there, and his job was he was the weed dealer. You know, that was his sole job at the whole company.
And there was a very straight German VP of hardware down the hallway in the building. I have no idea. He complained to management about the smell of pot smoke in the corridors. So they got him an office in a different building.
I have been asthmatic since I've been 12. I need drugs to breathe. I did not do drugs because drugs to me were something that let you get up in the morning, you know, and breathe. So nor did I think I wanted to mix those things. The high of me was doing the work, and I was always a happy guy. So I just didn't feel I needed it. So I never did drugs, but there were a lot there.
Don't put too much stock in the fact that every Atari employee was stoned out of their minds while making games.
I mean, there was all kinds of drugs consumed at Atari, but the real drug at Atari was going into a store and seeing your product, seeing your game on a shelf.
was this? 1980, 81, that time frame. Prior to Ray Kassar's emergence, I was part of the executive staff, you know, and Nolan, Joe, I, Steve Bristow, Gil, Dennis Groth, finance, you know, we were all friends and no politics and all that, and we all worked together and part of the team. It was great. Once Ray took over, nope, it was all a closed office, and he met with all his hires from Procter & Gamble, and so I realized, okay, I'm out of this. I'm either going to have to quit because Nolan had gone, Joe had gone, Lipkin, everybody had gone. I figured, well, I'll go back. This is my baby. I'm going to do it one more time. And we had used holography. We couldn't keep secrets at Atari. We're just no good at it. So we decided the best thing to do was put out disinformation. So one of the best ones was the next coin-op game is going to have holography in it. It was like, what the hell is that? I knew what it was, because having, you know, been to college and studied this physics and stuff. But that was just, but anyway, I decided, well, let's do something in holography. Maybe there's something there. I'll take it. Sounds hard, sounds interesting. I know a little bit about it. And we proceeded to explore holography and what could be done, and came up with a holographic toy that basically sold it to Ray, saying, how would you like, because the cartridge video game business seemed to be very good. How would you like to have a system where the cartridge, it's a cartridge-based system, but the cartridges are half the cost of, everything is half the cost of the VCS. And, hey, go ahead. It were very simple. They were nothing more than an LED, a simple LED game, the handheld LED game in those days. The only difference was we had a hologram with 2 images on it. You look through this box, and there were 2 lamps inside, and when you'd crash a spaceship, you'd see a hologram of a spaceship crashing. And but you could look through this half metallized Mylar and play a Space Invader game or something like that. We did all the work, put everything together, got a chip designed, package designed, and at the end, Ray wouldn't. We even took it to the toy fair or the consumer. And marketing wouldn't show it, wouldn't back it up, and we did it ourselves, engineering. And we think we sold 100,000 of them, but Ray would not release it, just wouldn't do it. And I realized that was it. They're not going to release that. I mean, this is now in a time when if it failed, you wouldn't even notice it. It wouldn't be a pimple on the balance sheet. But they were afraid to do it. Back when the whole company was, we're sure we'd do it. So that was the end of my career at Atari.
On the simplest level, what the VCS, the Atari 2600, what that is, it's a combination of plastic and computer chips that enables you to play a video game, an interactive video game on your home television, which is something that never really happened before.
If you're making an arcade game, it begins as a hardware project. If you need something more in the hardware, just put it in the hardware and you can use it in your game. The Atari 2600, we didn't have that luxury. The game was already in Grandma's house. It was already hooked up to her TV. And all we could do is make a different cartridge, sell that to the person, he plugs it in.
It was the thing that made video games a worldwide phenomenon. And all it is it's a box that enables you to play an interactive game on your TV. But on a cultural level, that's such a huge thing to do, because there were two things that achieved that changed the world, literally changed the world. One is it put computers in homes. At a time where IBM only had about 10,000 PCs sold altogether, Atari had millions of units installed, and every one of those was a computer in the home. The other thing it did was it created an interactive medium with television, which was always a passive medium. Before video games, people were just zombies sitting on the couch watching TV. But video games turned people into zombies, jumping up and down on the couch, yelling at the TV. And that was a very different experience. And I think that was huge in terms of taking people from a passive state to an active state. And we're still learning the implications of that.
The entire reason that Atari created the Atari 2600 home console was to put their arcade hits into the home. If we can sell home versions of our arcade hit games into the home, we can sell millions of them instead of just take quarters from the thousands of people who go to arcades. And so the hardware was designed to make it possible to play Tank and Pong. That's about all that they did in the hardware.
So the distinction is this. CoinUp gets to use more expensive hardware. They get to use tons and tons of hardware, and they get to refresh their hardware all the time.
I had played an Outlaw-like game in the arcade. I think it was Midway. And you know, I was just told to make a game, so I said, well, here's an idea, two guys shooting at each other. And so I made that game. My goal is to try to make it like the arcade game, so I could look at the arcade game and say, this is what it has to do. So there really wasn't any need for me to have communication with the arcade guys. I'm particularly proud of the Atari 2600 Canyon Bomber because it also has the Atari arcade game Depth Charge in it. So it turns out that in a 2K byte Atari 2600 cartridge, I simulated both Canyon Bomber and Depth Charge, which were probably $3,000 arcade game hardware.
When I was young, when I was little, I remember there was this drugstore, and in their comic book rack, they had these abridged versions of great literature. You'd read it, and it was the whole story of Treasure Island. War and Peace, a comic book. But that whole notion of an abridged version, that is what was going to happen.
When I did Donkey Kong, I had, not surprisingly, absolutely no contact with Nintendo. Coleco was able to get me a machine. So I had a machine that I could play and look at, and I had already played the game. And like David said, with Canyon Bomber, The game is the spec. Frankly, the hardware is so different in its capabilities that I can't think of any value I would have had getting in touch with anybody at Nintendo. It's like talking to the guy who created the Porsche Carrera about making a bicycle. I mean, it's like, there's not a lot there. Not a lot you're gonna tell me. Here's this masterpiece and do it on this toaster, you know? And I was young enough and stupid enough to not be intimidated. And I wasn't, because I was just a kid. And I was like, no big deal.
I'd have to say one of the more influential Atari games that hit me hard was Adventure.
Adventure had been a very popular game. Adventure is related to really a nerdy game. It's related to like text adventures or to Dungeons and Dragons more than any of the other things, any of the other intellectual property or content on the 2600.
So many games were just like kind of shooters and, you know, combat and whatnot, things like that that were very simple. But Adventure really broke the mold for what the 2600 was capable of.
But one of the most, like, I feel like magical, impactful moments with the Atari games is that we got Adventure, and I saw the cover at the drugstore, because that's where we had to buy video games, at the drugstore behind the photo counter. And we got it home. I was so excited to play it. I just didn't read the instructions. I just ripped it out of the box and like played it and started playing it. And I was like, oh, and there's a dot, and there's like, you know, the duck chasing me, and I got an arrow, and I can't figure out what's happening. He ate me. Oh my God.
The weird thing about Adventure was the dragons were supposed to be dragons, but they just looked like ducks. I don't know what they were thinking there.
The bridge and the bat, and it was so baffling. I really loved that experience of somewhat confused experience. And I feel like that's actually something I love still in games now, when there's that moment of like, what the? Where you just get, games can do that. They can just surprise you and they can make you feel really bewildered. And then as you slowly figure out how they work, that's part of the pleasure of them, I think, is that not knowing what to expect in them. So that moment of being surprised by adventure has really stuck with me. Another thing I like about adventure that I try to incorporate is that feeling that the game is really alive. The characters who are in that world live even when you're not looking at them on the screen. Like when the dragon or the bat flies on the screen in Adventure, you feel like it's been on a journey. It's been somewhere. Oh, the bat went over and it stole the shield. It stole the sword, and now it's in the room. It's like you don't feel like it was just spawned in that room. It's been in another room doing bat adventures.
And what it provided for me was a sense of mystery and exploration that would later influence the 2D adventure games that I would make that would help launch my career.
So one of the first questions they asked me at Atari was, what do you want to work on? So I just said to him, I said, what's the dirtiest, most basic elemental system that you have? And he goes, oh, well, that's the VCS. And I said, well, that's where I want to start.
I mean, the constraints on the programmers were worse than I ever even imagined were possible.
2600 doesn't draw a screen. It doesn't draw anything. What it does is it has these little logic devices, these counters and shift registers that say, this is the start of the screen, this is the left side of the screen. The electron beam is moving to the right. I'm going to count. I know how fast the electron beam is moving. I'm going to count until the electron beam is somewhere on the screen, and then I'm going to change the color on the screen for a little itsy bit.
There's only one console where you have to think about the electron gun moving across the screen and what machine cycle you're on and when you can show stuff on the screen. That's such a fun and unique and annoying challenge that it really hooks you.
It's the most fun I've ever had making a game. What do you say, Dave?
Fun might not be the word. You know, it is the most challenging thing you could do. When we were doing it at Atari and at Activision, there were fewer than 100 people in the world who could do what we were doing. And that in itself was, you know, very positive, very uplifting. It's really a sense of accomplishment. If you can create something that, you know, 1 million people love on this horribly limited piece of hardware, you've created something. You know, have a sense of accomplishment.
And there are very few things more technical challenging than trying to get a game out of the VCS in the first place, because the VCS was a very technically limited machine. It sounds like a fabulous thing, and when it first came out, it was, because people had never seen anything like it.
I don't know if other people are as rewarded by it, but you're overcoming tremendous challenges. There's nothing that's easy to do on the 2600. And you're winning, right? I love winning.
And the other thing that's fun about playing them still is that they're all 60 frames a second. They have to hit that or the screen won't draw, you know? So they're all even much better than I think consoles that came out a few years afterwards. They all feel really fast when you play them. No Atari game has any sort of lag or anything because they had no option to have lag.
It's like when today, in hindsight, people criticize the first screen of Donkey Kong on the 2600. When I finished that screen, I thought it was a miracle. And you get people on Facebook today saying it's the biggest piece of junk I ever saw. And you just have to understand the perspective of where you were at the time.
The programmers that worked with that machine were magicians.
So I looked over this game. It was Star Castle. I played it a bunch. I thought about it on the VCS. I looked it over and I realized, holy crap, this is going to suck. This is going to absolutely suck. And I could not afford to have my first project suck. I did a little preparation, and then I marched myself into Dennis Cobal's office, and I said, look, instead of doing this, I'd like to do this. This is something that I think uses some of the basic game ideas, but I think this is something that would work on the system. This other one won't work. And I just made this little presentation to him. And to his credit, he said, okay, you know what, go for it. The first thing I put up on the screen was an animated character. Most people use a block because they want to start working out their game mechanics and stuff like that. I put up an animation. That was the first thing I put up on a screen. And people would go by and they go, wow, that looks cool. What does it do? I'd be like, nothing. You know, that's what it does. There it is. I said, I'm still working on it. Don't worry. It's like, and then it got to the point where it was time to actually play it and have some of this stuff. So I had achieved my goal of trying to make something interesting. And it sucked as a game, and I was exactly caught in the place I didn't want to be. So what I did was I started taking feedback, which was extremely painful, to hear people telling me how much my game sucked. The only thing that really made it tolerable was that I wasn't so self-deluded at that point that I didn't realize it sucked also. Until I worked out making some of the changes and getting it through, I was in very bad shape. And I was feeling some very negative feedback from some other people, and I was feeling, you know, I'm usually the person who's hardest on myself. And that was a tough time for me. And I had to get through that before I could hear what people were saying and start to work on it. And I had to release myself from, but I have to have this, but I have to have this. You know, as a therapist, I always catch people when they say I have to. I always love, people say, you know, I have to, but I have to do this. And I always stop and I say, look, you don't have to. Obviously you don't have to because you're not doing it, right? You don't have to, but you could, but there's probably a reason you're not. And the reason I'm able to give that lesson to my clients now is because I had to get over that. I had this have-to that was making things not work. And until I could let that go, I couldn't make the game succeed. And when I did, it forced me to think in new ways, to think outside the box, and to go come up with some other left field solution. And when I made those changes, then suddenly Yars was really good. One of the product managers came by who was responsible for this product, and he goes, "Hey, well, we're working on naming your game." And I said, can I make a submission? Can I submit a name? And he goes, "Sure, why not?" I said, "Okay, I tell you what, come by here tomorrow morning." I said, "You guys won't have it settled by tomorrow, will you?" He goes, "No." I said, "Come by tomorrow morning, I will have something for you. I will have a submission for you." So now I know what I'm doing for the rest of the evening. And I don't know if you ever tried it before, when you just try to make up a new word, everything sounds stupid. At least it does for me. I can't come up with something that sounds cool. Everything sounds kind of dumb. So being the algorithmic thinker that I can be at times, I thought, well, if I can't just spontaneously come up with some name, I should come up with a way to derive the name. I'll come up with an algorithm. It's a simple title, what's going on? Maybe I need an action thing. You know, because it's an action game, I need an action word. I don't know the name of the character, but I thought, you know, revenge. Revenge is a great action word because everybody wants revenge, right? So I figure I'll go with revenge, and now all I need is whose revenge is it? Now I just need the name of the character. And then I thought, well, one of the great ciphers is, you know, writing something backwards. That's never a bad idea. You know, the head of the company's name is Ray Kazar. And Ray spelled backwards, that's Yar. And Yar sounds pretty cool. It's got a Y in it, so it's got like sci-fi, anything with Y's and Z's, you know, and maybe an X somewhere. That's good sci-fi stuff. And I sat down and I wrote a 10-page story called The Yarian Revenge of Razak IV. And that was that was going to be the title of the game, The Yarian Revenge of Razak IV. I stayed all night in the office. I was done like 3:30. I just laid down on the floor in my office and got a little sleep. And then around 10, you know, in comes the marketing manager. And so I handed him the package. I go, "Here you go. This is the package for the story." I didn't realize it fully at the time, but what I had done was I had created the first backstory in the history of video games.
A fly. I'll have a mutant fly. Hello, Yar. You'll need some protection. Ion zone. Shift chroma. Intensify. Okay, now you'll need some weapons. You have a formidable enemy. The Kotile. Watch it, Yar. He has a lethal drone. And some other tricks up his sleeve. Spiral. Go. Good move, Yar. Now I have a surprise for you. A Zorlon cannon. Use it, Yar. Fire again. Got him. That's revenge. Yars Revenge, a video game. Yeah, this can be fun. This can be a lot of fun. Like Asteroids. Get him. Do it. Beautiful. Watch it. Disintegrate. Now let's go into deeper space. Galactic map. Sector 11. Hyperspace. Sights in. Cylon warships, attack. Steady, stand by, photons. Star Raiders. That's it, Star Raiders. That'll keep them on their toes. Let's see what we can come up with next.
We're Atari. We have the vision, and we invented the technology to bring the excitement home to you.
So Adventure was a really popular product, and we were kind of, there was some vibe around maybe a sequel to Adventure. And somewhere in there, I got the idea of doing a series of games that were contests with comic books with real prizes made by Franklin Mint. We were part of Warner Communications, and somewhere along there, we had started to be doing bits of comic books with the games. And because Warner Communications owned DC Comics. Warner Communications, I happen to know, I don't know that anyone else was paying attention, also owned Franklin Mint, right? Franklin Mint being a collectible company. I don't know, you know, they made plates and little figurines and stuff, I know, and medallions, and not my scene, but you know, it's a creative world. It's hard to talk about this without going me, me, me. I don't love going me, 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 but a lot of it was, I consider myself to basically have been the showrunner of Sword Quest. The concept was mine, the literary concept, the material. So the games are actually moderately literate and erudite, right? The whole story is put together as a lot like a Grail quest or something in Joseph Campbell. It would be a hero's journey, a spiritual evolution, a life. It's a story of a life, of a energetic, a magical life, right, through these mystical systems. So I pulled a lot of, I embedded it in a lot of historical culture of mysticism, and sold the idea, and it went over big. You know, it was certainly, it was brave, it was ambitious, it was audacious, and it had a certain je ne sais quoi, but I don't know what it is. You know, I'll back up a little bit. There was kind of a bizarre effort to do a combination of Twitch and adventure game, to merge and to create an action adventure. I think Howard tried this in Raiders, right, where he tried to make an adventure game that was built into an action game and merge the two. So I consider Howard and I to be some of the pioneers of action adventure. Got to say this in a certain way. So you'd play this action game and maybe get a clue, a prize that you'd add to your inventory. And if you had that in your inventory, then you could unlock, then you'd be on this map. You wouldn't necessarily see the map, but you'd be inside a maze, and a door would open in the maze, and there'd be another action game there. And so it was kind of like a first-person adventure with action elements. That was basically, and you know, I got looking back at it when I say it that way and knowing what was in the times, it was very audacious. And it was actually very creative. It was really, you know, it was really cool.
The 5200 was a tragedy. The 5200 was a good idea gone horribly wrong.
The big problem that we had at Atari, the thing that killed the industry more than any other one thing, even more possibly than the E.T. video game, is that it was the first product life cycle. No one had ever been through a major success video game console life cycle. So where does it end? Nowadays, when somebody comes out with a new system, they already are designing the next system because they know the life of a system. They know a console is good for a certain number of years, and then it's going to die, it's going to fall off, and that's when we need to be ready and prepared to come in with the new system. Holy crap, you know, our first machine is finally falling off the cliff. We need something. We have something. We can take the 800, 400, 800 computer, repackages the 5200, spit it out, and we can do it.
So the 5200 was basically what the 400, 800 was going to be 3 years before. It's a tough business. Business is cruel. And you know, like I say, I'll say it again, it was the first time anything was being done. No one knew.
And what happened was the Atari 5200, it grew very large because marketing wanted perceived value, so bigger was better in some respects. And then marketing got really focused on the Intellivision, and Intellivisions had a bunch of buttons. They had a keypad, and they had this disc with 12 distinct regions. And so, hey, if we put an analog stick here, and one that doesn't self-center was the great idea, this will be a better marketing message than the Intellivision controller. And of course, it was a horrible experience. The company lost focus on what was important, and it was gameplay's important. You know, good games sell, bad games don't. If you've got a bad control mechanism, doesn't matter how good the graphics are. It's not going to be fun to play.
Now what do you do? So, and that was the thing. Engineering we really wanted to do something cool, right? We wanted to do like a real next generation because the 400, 800 was already last generation.
The engineering team and the creative team, the game designers, we were so upset, and we all felt that we were making a wrong decision with this controller, that we put together a petition to upper management, and we just explained that, you know, this is a great product, the control is lacking, we've got some other alternatives we want you to see, and my name's number 3 on the list of the petitioners.
See, I wasn't someone who signed petitions so much as talked to people behind the scenes, because I always felt that was more like the way you operate in a corporation. And but I definitely put the word out whenever I could that, like, you know, this is something we either should have done a few years ago or, you know, can't really do now.
We told marketing, hey, we could make this 2600 compatible. They didn't want anything to do with that. They said they must be very separate and distinct. We can't have backwards compatibility, which at the time we thought might be a great feature. It's a good way to get people that have these Atari games already and keep them on the Atari platform instead of giving them an opportunity to jump to another platform. And so we designed the product specifically so that you could never have 2600 compatibility. About 2 months before launch, they demanded 2600 compatibility. And at that time, we had to build an adapter. And then we actually had to modify consoles that were already made, the first ones, to work with this adapter. And we called this thing the piggyback parasite. We were just horribly embarrassed by that situation. That never should have happened.
There was some big time denial, you know, around Atari, because nobody wants their parade rained on. And when it's the best parade you've ever imagined in your life, nobody wants to see a cloud. You just don't want to see it. So we didn't. When you have a tragedy, and I do believe that the fall of the video game industry in the early 80s was a tragedy. It was a tragedy to many, many people. It changed a lot of lives.
I think it's pretty obvious when it comes to the video game crash that Atari didn't have control over the quality.
I mean, it needed some sort of way to keep just anybody from writing cartridges for it.
And so many people saw this video game gold rush, and they just, started dumping crap. I remember going into KB toy stores and just seeing, really bad box art and just really just terrible looking games. And that's when I started losing interest, and the market became flooded just with garbage. And it ultimately led to, of course, things like E.T. being, actually buried in the desert like garbage.
And what happened was that E.T. became the face of the crash of the video game industry. And I, of course, was the butt behind the face. That's kind of the way it went.
Greed and hubris, that's what undid Atari. If they just had worked more from a place of like focusing on making great games and delivering great games to the customer instead of like, how can we maximize revenue, I feel like they'd still be a huge powerhouse today.
Frankly, Warner did not understand technology. He didn't understand the consumer marketplace, the video game, and so Ray Kassar, I think was afraid of releasing new product because it might not be as successful as VCS. So that's a sure way to fail. And
I regret that we didn't have a new console by '84 that would have made it so that Atari continued to be a really viable business.
We never, ever got down to ever having any process by which we could come up with a better system.
Even today, I think people do believe that, like, if they had just released like the 5200 earlier, or if they released the 7800, or they had done different things, they would could never have they would have survived the crash a lot better, and they would be like a powerhouse today. Like as a kid, I didn't know much about business, but I just felt like something was wrong.
No one knew anything. Certainly, no one knew how to replace an existing console with a new one.
The real one-liner about why the game industry crashed and went away is that it was a first product life cycle and nobody knew what to do.
there's this funny time period in the history of, if I wrote a book on the history of the video game industry, there's this funny time period where we had left Activision and we went from this fabulous AAA office complex, beautiful. We had more space than we needed by a factor of 5, and we went to the most horrible office in Midland Park, New Jersey, in the basement of an optician's office. Game industry, this was after the crash. Game industry was a disaster. And it was just, oh man, what an office. It was horrible. But we survived in it. I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do. So anyway, we're in this horrible office and we're doing C64 stuff at that point. And I get a call from a buddy of mine. Actually, he was our part-time sales guy. And he always visited Toys R Us, and he knew them really well. He called me and said, you know, you're gonna laugh, but they want to know if anybody's doing 2600 games. Because at that point, there were none. Nobody was doing them.
But there were 26 million consoles in homes.
And people were going in Toys R Us saying, why don't you sell games for my Atari anymore? So I said, wow, that's interesting. How many would he buy if he had a 2600 game? He said, oh, you know, 20, 30,000 pieces probably. And I said, all right, I'll get back to you. So we did Title Match Wrestling and Super Skateboarding, first 2 titles. I mean, regular skateboarding, first 2 titles. And he loved them and they sold like crazy. And at that point in time, we were the only people in the world making games on the Atari 2600. My phone rings, and it's the Tramiels. I saw you did some 2600 games. You know, do a couple for us? Because word got around. There's actually a need. And then Activision calls and says, do some 2600 games for us? And I said, well, why don't you guys just do them? He goes, well, you know, if I can be completely honest with you, we don't have anything. We don't have the specs. We don't have manuals. We don't have the equipment. He said, we couldn't make a 2600 game if we wanted to. So could you make something for us? I tell people that, they're like, who the hell wanted 2600 games? You know what? No one told consumers that there had been a crash. No one went to their house and said, you don't like video games anymore. Because that's what Toys R Us and Walmart said. People don't like video games anymore. But the people at home are sitting going, God damn, I'm tired of combat. Isn't there something else I can play on this machine? So it was good. We had a great run there. We had a lot of money off those games.
How's business?
Fine.
Terrific. How do you keep track of your customers?
My Atari 400 home computer. Excuse me, Dad.
Why Atari?
Shopped around. It's a lot of computing capability for such a low price.
You use it a lot?
Sure, life's not all fun and games. There's homework, I even program.
Uh-huh.
Atari has lots of software, not all the others do. And of course, only Atari has games like Centipede.
Games?
Well, we executives have to unwind.
Atari home computers. Only Atari puts so much in it for you.
Bought a home computer, huh?
An Atari 800 home computer. Nothing but the best for my son.
Why Atari?
Atari makes computers that, seem friendly, part of the family.
Want to show off?
Sure, they're real easy. Terrific software, huh?
Nice graphics.
And how do you like this for sound capability?
Impressive.
It sure is.
So what's his first project?
Soon, the alphabet. A is for airplane.
Atari home computers. Only Atari puts so much in it for you.
I think the Atari 400, 800 were really the first home computers that I felt like were designed to be in somebody's home and for an average person to utilize.
Atari, made some interesting decisions over the years. I mean, they were #1 in the world in making video games, but they saw home computers were coming, and Apple II was out, and they said, we got to compete with Apple for, computers. So it came down from on high that we were going to make a computer like the Apple II, but better in some way. But the engineering department said, hey, we're video game people. Why are we doing this? But they were told, you will do this. So what actually happened was the engineers made the Atari 800 into the next best video game player. It had all the sprite capability, it had coprocessors in there. The first GPU in a computer was probably in the Atari 800. All of this stuff was going on in the engineering department, and yet the management thought we were making a computer. We were really just making a video game that we could make cool games on.
My participation was mainly on the prototype pre-production side. We had this very sophisticated, allegedly sophisticated, internal interactive test system called the PIT system that we couldn't get a single unit to pass. Labor Day 1979, can you guys work overtime over the weekend? We need to hand build some production units because we need to put them complete through the entire process. They need to be completely finished, consumer product in the box. We need these for JCPenney's so that they can make the holiday catalog. So we worked, I actually didn't leave Atari for about 3 days, hand building these units. And it was like 4 400s and 4 800s to ship on Monday to JCPenney's. They received them at their warehouse, they took pictures of them for the catalog, and then they immediately shipped them back to us. That was it. That's what we needed to do to get this product out.
My main contribution to the Atari 800 operating system, I created a language similar to PostScript that could draw lines and squares and circles and vector graphics drawn into the bitmap of the Atari 800 and put them into the operating system so that I didn't have to put it in any of my games. So I could borrow from the operating system stuff that I'd put in there and use it when making games. So yes, we were tasked with working on the operating system, but we did it our way. We did it in the video game method.
The idea came up that maybe I could get one of these machines for Christmas, and I thought I was going to get an Apple II because that was what I had at school and what I thought was cool. But I got an Atari, and it was an Atari 800 with a tape cassette drive. At first I was like, oh, it's not an Apple, but it's my own computer. It's super exciting. And then the more I got into it, the more I realized it was so much better than the Apple. Probably piss off some Apple people, but it was really an amazing machine. I mean, the graphics and sound on it were incredible, and it was a super fun machine to program. And so that was really what got me started.
we had access to the 800, 400, pre-production models for probably a good year before they ever hit the marketplace. And I would literally every weekend check out an Atari 800 and prototype Star Raiders and spend the entire weekend playing Star Raiders. It was just absolutely phenomenal. I couldn't get enough of it.
One of my favorite games in the 800. I really liked Star Raiders. I still play that today. I still bring up my Atari 800 and play that occasionally.
Star Raiders was the killer app. Star Raiders was to the 800 what Halo was to the Xbox. It was the game. You really, pretty much everyone bought it with the system. It was the system seller.
It was very well done. It had a lot of depth. It was easy. It had easy modes where people could get through it, and you could work up to the harder modes. And the harder modes just made things a little more difficult. They didn't penalize you for getting good at the game. So,
what did I do with my 800? And I actually did buy an Atari 800 in the company store, and I paid full price for it, full employee price. And I played Star Raiders because that's what you did on the Atari 800. There was a lot of great stuff about, storing recipes and doing this and learning things. And I did go through some of the learning things, but I played the living daylights out of Star Raiders, which was, I think, probably for a couple of years, the most phenomenal game you could play outside of an arcade.
Atari brings the computer age home.
Okay, Ma, what's the capital of Nebraska? Come on, I'm trying.
Atari home computers can teach you or reach you with important information anytime, day or night.
I already checked the computer. The Bears lost.
How about the Lions?
Oh, you owe me on that, too.
And if your jump shot is a little off, we can help you there, too.
Hey, guys, how about a deal? The car tonight for Atari basketball.
No. In fact, there's no end to your possibilities with Atari home computers. They're easy to use and afford. But best of all, they just might be the wisest investment you'll ever make.
Watch this. Hey, Mom. What's the capital of Delaware?
Dover.
I told you she's smart.
Atari home computers. We've brought the computer age home.
These families are learning about home computers. The family with the Atari home computer is learning
Spanish, German,
French,
Italian.
The other,
No foreign languages.
the Atari family is learning
3 programs teach us to program.
the other.
We've only one.
And while the Atari family learns to play Centipede Star Raiders and soon,
E.T.
the other learned
We made a mistake.
over 1,000 programs featuring the world's most popular games, but sorry, only with Atari.
There were so many things near the end of my early days with Atari that I wished, like everything we felt was underappreciated. Like I bought a Lynx and I was trying to find people to play the Lynx with me, and everyone else had a Game Boy, and I was like, you guys, Todd's Slime World, let's do this, let's play Warbirds, come on.
And the Lynx was totally Sam's baby. He loved the notion of the hardware, and Sam, man, he loved the Lynx into the ground, right? Against all odds, he wanted to make it successful. We did the original one that was sort of the original design, and then he was like, no, we got to double down on it and do it and make it better.
Being in the Bay Area, you see these ads, come test video games. So I think I tried out at a few places. Electronic Arts comes to mind. Didn't get the job there, but was lucky enough to kind of get the QA job at Atari. Back in the day, I think it was a lot more fun. People playing 4 Lynx games and then having them all go out of sync and then having to track that down. Like, probably at the 1,000th time that happens, it does get a little old. But I think back in the day, you actually got a lot more input into the games. So a lot of the last Lynx games like Lemmings and some of the early Jaguar games like Cybermorph, the QA department actually got a lot of input into those games from a design perspective. You know what? I think the Lynx was great hardware. I like the fact that it was color. And I think the fact that you could have this like 4-way local multiplayer was great.
20 some years later, here I am buying a Lynx with a RGB output because people are still modding them, and selling them on eBay and stuff, right? I remember sitting in the room with Jack, and Jack saying to all of us, let's go back to our roots. Let's do at least one more game system.
The controller is quirky. The industrial design of both the CD and the main unit are quirky. And the fact that, like, I guess somebody used the tooling on the main unit to make some kind of dental device. Like, it just has like this weird, quirky history that I think is also inviting.
One of the most interesting things about the architecture of Jaguar was this notion of having the Motorola 68000, which basically was responsible for booting and housekeeping, and then the Tom and Jerry chips.
I mean, I think at the time, 68000 was still a strong processor, but obviously it was in the Genesis and other things, so you weren't really getting that true 64-bit experience. But I think there's games out there that took advantage.
There's so many features in Jaguar that for a developer like Jeff Minter that did Tempest 2000 for Jaguar was like, wow, give me this.
I would say other than Cybermorph, it did not necessarily feel like that quantum leap that we were promised. It wasn't the flying cars, as they say, that we would have in the future, but you could see the potential, and that's what was really cool. You could see the parts of Cybermorph. You're like, oh, fully 3D world compared to something like maybe a Star Fox, which was on rails.
My perspective is the rule of thirds, where if you want to wind up with one really, really great game, you need to lay down 9 bets, because out of those 9, 1/3 probably will ship. And out of those 3 games, one is going to be a hit, the other will be, and the other probably might be a dinger. Yeah. You know, there just wasn't enough momentum behind the Jaguar at that time to be able to do that, when Sega and Nintendo were basically already on their 3.5 generation of consoles, you know, at those times.
I mean, if Aliens vs. Predator came out as a launch title, maybe the history of the Atari Jaguar might have been slightly different. I think there are a lot more Jaguar fans today than there were when the system actually came out, and it's cool to see people enjoying the system some 20-odd years later. I believe everybody appreciated the innovative aspect, but on the other hand, the software was late, some of it was a little janky, but I think just saying, you know, time heals all wounds, to go onto the Jaguar forums now and look at the love for the system, honestly, like, somebody that worked on it, I can't say that I completely understand it, but I totally appreciate it. I'm like, where were you guys like 20 or 30 years ago? You know, like, you would have made my life like a heck of a lot better.
I feel the best Atari games ever made have been made in the last 5 years. Like, I think the homebrew scene is incredible. People have figured out, and it's unfair to compare because the original people had like 5 weeks to make, you know, ET or whatever. And now people can take, it's like a hobby. You can take as long as you want, and you have access to like special chips and stuff. But still, they're still working. Eventually, making carts that you plug into your original Atari 2600 and they run, and they're super fun.
We saw it evolving, and there was a lot of nostalgia involved for that to happen. We loved this particular game system, and it's a great intellectual challenge.
In 2009, I was given a talk in Philadelphia just talking about the game business and my experience there. And after the talk, somebody came up to me and they said, hey, I just saw this cool book just came out called Racing the Beam. And it's about programming the 2600. And since you mentioned that you worked on the 800, I thought you might be interested in this book. And I'm like, it does sound really interesting.
Back in the old days when I had my Atari 800, I did learn 6502 assembly language, and so I've been messing around and making some of my own Atari games. I'm not ready to make Psychonauts on the Atari yet, but someday I'm going to make Psychonauts on the Atari 2600. Not announcing that yet, but don't tell anyone. But
what is the point of going back to work on one of these old machines anyway? I mean, to me, the point is I want to know what it was like to be, you know, Todd Fryer, you know, and who was, you know, told he has 3 months to write Pac-Man on this terrible machine. And am I a man enough, you know, programmer to be able to do that?
You know, Pac-Man was actually technically quite solid.
it's fun to program for the 2600 because it's unique. It's, you know, 128 bytes, not K, but like bytes of memory. Like, it's so limited that it helps you edit, you know, and so you can't do everything. You can't imagine an experience and then implement it on the Atari. You have to go the other way around. Like, how many blocks can I move on the screen? Like, how can I turn that into a fun game?
It was very, very hard to squeeze a 128 level game with a, you know, title screen and a boss encounter and all that into 4K of ROM, because that's one of the limitations on the 2600 if you're going to live within the original constraints. And so I learned a ton about the 2600 along the way. I had a lot of fun. It was a lot of hard work, and I'm proud of the way it turned out.
I think of the homebrew as the hobbyist who wants to see if he can do it, and he makes a game and he makes a few for friends. That has evolved into some actual publishers making Atari 2600 games that are out there.
But there was a guy came on there the other day, and he's like, I just want to say this is the most supportive technical community I have ever been part of. So it is an amazing community and very welcoming to new people. So I would encourage people to do that.
There was no console war in the beginning. There was, you know, in the beginning there was only Atari, and the children looked upon it and saw that it was good and bought Atari, and then asked for Atari games for every Christmas and birthday. The Easter eggs, finding the Easter eggs in Howard's game and Warren's game, you know, those were huge moments for me in my childhood, and my favorite early gaming experiences, especially finding that room in Adventure. You know, that path that everybody, whoever found the Easter egg, follows those clues, and then discovers this, you know, this secret room, this message hidden by the creator of the game, who I didn't even know who he was, and here's his name, and a whole secret room, you know, that most kids who played this game never found. I found this secret place left by the creator, you know, with a message for me. It was profound, and the first time that it ever happened in a video game. And so years later, when I was, you know, I think had the initial idea for Ready Player One was, what if Willy Wonka had been a video game designer? And what if he held his golden ticket contest inside a video game? And that immediately made me think of the Secret Room Adventure and how that could be, how he finds his worthy successor, instead of a tour through the factory where he slowly kills off all the children. It could be an Easter egg hunt inside this, sprawling video game, and it could be hidden the way that those Easter eggs were hidden in the Atari games. And so there's no way I ever would have written Ready Player One if I hadn't grown up with an Atari and playing those games and finding those Easter eggs.
As I was reading through it, there was just so much familiarity in there. It felt like, as I was reading it, that the person who had written it, that I grew up with them. Because some of the names that were in there, some of the locations, some of the references were things that I thought only I knew. And nobody else in the world would understand or appreciate any of it. My literal opening, my email to him, before anything blew up on Ready Player One, my literal opening was just like, we have to know each other because there's things in this book that like only I know. Like, where did we meet before? That was the beginning of our full communication, which led to the stacks.
He read Ready Player One and it spoke to him, and he sent me an email that said, hey, I make video games for a living and your book really spoke to me, and if you ever want to make a video game, let me know. And I was right in the middle of trying to figure out if I could somehow do a promotional contest for the paperback that mirrored the contest in the novel. I wanted to do some sort of contest with 3 video game challenges and a grand prize at the end of it. And because Mike made that offer, I took him up on it. I'm like, oh, well, we could make an Atari game that you have to beat as the first challenge, and it could be the game that Wade makes in the novel.
Part of what made the book feel like it was written for me is because of the context around the 2600 rite of passage in there. Because for programmers in the game industry, 2600 is this really difficult platform to develop games for. To get anything to even appear on screen, to get anything to even work correctly, you have to just break your brain and rid it of everything that you understand about how games are developed today and go back to this kind of like primitive, primordial way of coding. And so for a lot of programmers, it is a rite of passage. If you can do that, you can do anything.
Wade makes his own game, and it's the Stacks. It's based on his life in the Stacks, and he describes it as a Pitfall ripoff that has you climbing around the stacked trailers, looking for food voucher power-ups and trying to avoid like pedophiles. And it's like a 1-paragraph description of this game. But I sent it to Mike, and he's like, "Oh, hell yeah!" And
so I had dabbled over the years with trying to understand 2600 programming. I'd made a couple small games, a couple hacks. So when this kind of came around, it was the perfect excuse to just finally deliver something that was all original and build something from the ground up. Once it started to work, it was completely satisfying. I felt like I had mastered what the greatest engineers in the world have mastered before me, and that I finally had an understanding of it. And to get there, of course, I had to enlist some help. And so that help came in the form of Kevin Wilson, our CTO at Digital Eclipse. I didn't mention this before, but we only had a few weeks to pull this off. So we were not only trying to learn 2600, but we're also given the time frame that basically ET had to try to get this game out the door. So we were reliving the worst of Atari's development history all over again, and I savored every second of it.
In our original contest version, all the items are hidden in the same place, which is great because we had people making maps. For like the first time since they were kids, they were making maps of the stacks to remember, so if they died, they could go back and find where the items were. But then they added randomization, and now it might be one of the best Atari games ever made. Not to brag, but the stacks is pretty deep and pretty replayable for an Atari game. That's why I think Atari is always going to hold a special place in the hearts of people like me, just because it was, it was the first, and it was, so needed. We were so bored in the late 70s. We needed video games at home so badly. The fact that other better consoles came later is because they saw the giant cultural and economic behemoth that Atari immediately became. Atari created the video game industry, the home video game industry, and everybody that's come since then is, kind of building on what Atari created.
started, video games were almost considered to be a bastardization of this wonderful technology. Why are you using it for fun when you could be creating missiles? I think we stood for innovation, and also we were the genesis story of the video game, which is kind of important. So I think you always have a hallowed position when you're the first.
Yeah.
When we chose the Fuji logo, I wanted to be an upward swoosh. And I think that if you look at the Atari logo, it's a collective, it's aspirational, just in the nature of the graphic. Also, Atari, I lifted it from the Game of Go. So it's a game word. But I hadn't realized that it also means bullseye.
Right.
It also means jackpot. So, you know, it's got this affirmative. In fact, I was talking to a Japanese guy one time, and he says, very good name, Atari. Perhaps a bit boastful for Japanese.
You're like, spot on for Americans.
Spot on for Americans.
Yeah.
One of the ethos of Atari was work hard, play hard. So we always had games, not just Atari games, but foosball and pool tables in the snack rooms and what have you. What that said was, we don't care when you come to work. If you come to work, get your job done, we're okay. We're all adults here. And we don't care how you come to work. You want to wear tennis shorts and blue jeans? Do you want to wear a tuxedo? We don't care. We had one guy that liked to wear ball gowns, but that's another story. I could tell some stories, though, about how I used to mess with the people who copied me.
Oh, please. All right. Let's hear that.
Okay. Atari started by building games that you could do in a garage shop. You know, so anybody that had a garage shop could copy us. And so of the 150,000 estimated Pong-type games that were created, Atari only shipped 30,000 of them. So we got less than a fifth of our market.
Right.
You know? And so as we innovated, people would start copying us. And I thought, I'm going to get them. So I had our semiconductor suppliers. We were kind of a big deal in the semiconductor industry because they were selling a lot to the military and that sort of thing, but they'd sell 20 or 100 chips. We were buying thousands.
Right.
And so I had them mismark the chips. So that we had...
That you guys were using.
That we were using.
So if somebody tried to reverse engineer it.
So
wow.
if they reversed engineer it and just bought off the shelf those same numbers, they'd populate the board and they wouldn't work.
Did you ever hear of anybody doing that?
Oh yeah. We in fact,
brilliant.
We had one company that basically declared bankruptcy because they had a whole floor full of machines that they worked because they were hurrying to do it.
Oh man.
And we had the temerity to have a champagne party on their front lawn. We celebrated their demise and invited them, of course.
Did they show up?
No.
What do you think Atari's role is, not just in video games, but in popular culture today?
Well, I think that Atari has an unassailable role as being the Genesis story. I believe that it is understood by a lot that it succeeded because of creativity. 30 of those years, it was kind of in hands that were not kind to it. Don't say anything bad. So I think that pieces of the brand were damaged. Not irrevocably, but it could have been husbanded better. And so right now, I think that it would be good to take the innovation legacy and push it forward into the future.